The story we're looking at is Damasoto Tower by J. Wilburn. Abel Hale was trying to remember something he just forgot. In the last normal moment of his last day on the 73rd floor of Damasoto Tower, he couldn't recall if it was important or not. His fingers hovered over the top of the keys, so it was probably computer related, but so was everything with his job. That missing piece just outside his mental reach left a void of anxiety and mild panic. Abel would wonder for the rest of his life if that mild anxiety had led to a spiral right to the spiral of his emotions in the next moment. Now I'm actually going to flip this because when I was first writing it, I wrote it as if him feeling anxious before all the action started made his terror worse. But as the story plays out, that doesn't really line up with what's happening. So I'm actually going to reverse it and say maybe being anxious actually stunted his response to the real terror that came. So flipping this whole sentiment around to better fit the story. He wondered for the rest of his life if the mild anxiety had dampened his emotions in the next moment. He would have been afraid either way, of course, but that last piece of forgetfulness had unscrewed the top of his emotions before what should have been the real terror began. Okay, so now we kind of almost like there's a release valve on his emotions because he was already anxious before, so he just kind of stayed in that anxious state. All the glass in the western facing wall had blown inward with hurricane force, and supports along with the side tore through inward with hurricane force. I need a "the" here. That's what's throwing this off. All right, let me read that again, see if it makes sense to me this time. All the glass in the western facing wall had blown inward with hurricane force. Had blown, let's just say blue. Because it's just past tense, not past participle. All right, all the glass in the western facing wall blew inward with hurricane force, and the supports along that side tore through the front walls of the, tore through the weaker front walls of the more important offices of the higher level executives. All right, that may need to be pared back a little bit, but I'll look at it later. One bent piece of steel raked across Abel's desk and obliterated his computer. His fingers still hovered over the empty space as his desk was swept clean, let's say, for the first time in forever. All right. There was a moment of total dumbfounded shock. Someone had been laughing on the eastern edge of the floor. Say over on the eastern edge of the floor. That cackle continued for a few seconds as the horror ripped across. Those seconds were an eternity each. Before the laughing stopped, screaming overran it. I'll say from all directions. Ari Weiss had the desk closest to Abel, so his screaming was above all others. Abel turned his face into the wind of loose papers and concrete dust. Everything smelled burned and hot. He blinked against the onslaught, but saw Ari's wrists spurting blood where his hands used to be. A portion of Ari's face was gone and a shredded mess below his nose. He was still screaming, though. Ari's computer was untouched. All right. Ari turned his face toward Abel, and nausea rose up in his belly like a rocket. In his shock, he thought he was hungry and didn't even notice when he vomited a small portion of his breakfast onto his shirt. Ari's eyes rolled up into the bloodshot whites, and he fell out of his rolling chair away from Abel. The outside, which was open all the way across the western side, let's say the view to the outside, the view to the outside, which was open all the way across the western side of the building, looked like pitch night. Looked like the pitch of midnight. Pitch of a starless midnight. The whole structure shifted like it was going over, but then snapped back into place hard enough to send Abel tumbling to the floor. The lights went out and more people screamed before they flickered back on. Abel raised his head from the thin carpet to see light outside again. The darkness had been something else, and now it was moving. Abel sucked in breath and couldn't seem to release it. The line of marbled flesh of a reptilian thing big enough to be a god wavered away and then slammed into the building again. The tower vibrated with violent, blurring force. Lights fell and rose in intensity. Lights, let's say dimmed, because fell makes it sound like they came out of the ceiling. Lights dimmed and rose in intensity. Ceiling tiles came down. One broke on Abel's shoulder and felt like stone. Filing cabinets tipped over. Desks tumbled. The shapes of running people were swiped away in an instant. Let's say one woman Abel did not recognize charged past him, stepping on Ari's body as she went. Abel couldn't understand why she was running toward that endless marbled skin instead of away from it. She did not pause as she left the broken edge of the floor. Okay, let's say she simply vanished. If she fell, it wasn't like a cartoon or a sinking ship. She could have fallen, or she could have been swiped away by something faster than sight, but she was just gone either way. Say, as the tower tried to shake itself apart. Alright. The marbled skin of the giant thing against the building moved further away and showed the view over the crumbling edge of the 73rd floor, a fall out into the cityscape abyss. The roar was high and awful, like metal scraping against everything in the world. It hurt Abel's teeth and made his brain feel like it was melting. That silenced everything on Damasoto 73. This couldn't be real. Monsters, giant monsters anyway, were a thing people across oceans dealt with. It had been more than half a century since there had been one on this continent. That terrible scream of a reptile god sounded again. Another creature with a deeper roar shook the world in its rage too. Two of them? This was going to be terrible if two of them were fighting in the city. Abel, his eyes focused on Serenity Goddard on the floor just 3 feet away from him. Let's say she blocked his view of Ari, and he was grateful for that. Their parents had done their best to set the two of them up once they started working together. Serenity had been more resistant to it than he had. If their parents hadn't been friends, or I don't need two ors, or had the sense to leave them alone, who knows what might have happened. What do we do? She asked. He blinked several times as he positioned his tongue to speak. His teeth. He blinked several times. Okay, this is a separate sentence. As he positioned his tongue to speak, his teeth felt loose in his mouth, and that distracted him. Are you hurt? She called over the persistent wind. No, I don't know. We need to get out of here. The stairwell. Serenity got to her knees and then stood over him. The eastern wall of the office ripped away, and the wind through the floor doubled. More monsters circling the building. How long could the tower stand up to that? They didn't reinforce for monsters. They didn't reinforce for monsters on this continent anymore with construction. Reinforce with, let's say, skyscraper. With skyscraper construction. That'll work. All right. Come on. She pulled at his shoulder when he didn't get up on his own. He gritted his loose teeth as to the... Let's say against. He gritted his loose teeth against the sickening pain of injury. Did he hurt his shoulder in the fall? He couldn't remember. She pulled him along in the direction of the stairs, all the way across the cluttered office. He finally started using his own feet to go with her. Yeah, well, she wasn't dragging him. He started using his feet better to go with her. That'll work. Doesn't sound like he was limp the whole way then. If he'd gone any faster, they might have been cut down on their fifth step. Something brilliant and silver whirled inches in front of their face. It careened off a support, taking a chunk of stone with it. All right. A helicopter buzzed by the open eastern side. We'll put an N on the end of eastern. All right. Guns boomed and monsters screeched in pain and anger. Two more of those silver things tore their way through the floor. Abel and Serenity dropped to their knees, still holding on to each other. Maya, Abraham, and Nova Sammy kept going, one on each side of them. The same whirling silver rounds. So now it sounds like it's gunfire. Cut through both of them. It took most... Oh, it's a one round, okay. So let's not say the same. Let's say a single. That'll be clearer. A single whirling silver round cut through both of them. It took most of Maya's chest and most of Nova's back. Both came apart as they folded to the floor. Blood misted Abel's face and then splashed Serenity's front. She gagged and choked. He tried to wipe it away from his face, but just smeared the mess around. A few chunks of meteor stuff fell away. She pushed his arm aside. Okay, he's wiping her face. He tried to wipe it away from, let's say, her face, but just smeared the mess around. A few bits of meteor stuff fell away. She pushed his arm aside and spit a couple of times. We have to keep going. He got up with her, and they did. To the west, Abel caught a glimpse of fire. Then it was gone from sight in a swirl of white smoke closer to the building. Help! Both of them turned to look up. To look along. Let's say along instead of up. To look along what had been one of the larger aisles, but was now a field of debris and overturned furniture. Help, please. It was Autumn Coleman. She had just graduated and had been working with them maybe a month. She'd seemed nice. Now her hair was pasted down on one side of her head in a wash of blood. They ran to her. Abel shoved a desk off of her. It rolled and then vanished through a gaping pit in the middle of the floor. He hadn't even seen it. He hadn't even seen it until the desk fell through it. They could fall right through something like that if they didn't spy it first. Then Abel realized he never heard the desk hit. How many floors did that hole drop through? I can't make it stop, Serenity said. Abel turned to see Serenity pressing both hands onto a wound on Autumn's leg. Splintered bone stuck between Serenity's fingers. He realized that Autumn's hair wasn't matted. It had been ripped away from her scalp down to skull plates. A squirting wound on Autumn's neck was tapering off as Serenity worried with the leg. That's all Autumn got out before her eyes lost focus and she stopped looking real. Serenity, I think the bleeding has stopped. I think he couldn't say it. Fix this word here real quick. All right. Seth Wyatt crawled out from between two overturned desks. He stopped just short of that open pit, but didn't act like he noticed it. I love you, Seth yelled. I love you, and I'm sorry. Let me put an exclamation point on this first one. All right. He was talking into his phone. Abel wondered if he should call his parents. Was this it? Was that all that was left for him to do? Put a question mark there. Light and heat flared at his back. He turned in time to see a spout of flame chase two military helicopters away to the west. One leathery wing banked into view and then was gone. More monster screams filled the world. Serenity took his hand with her sticky fingers and pulled him along. She had discovered Autumn's fate and stood to go while he was distracted. Come on, Seth, he yelled into the wall with sound from the monster's roar. We have to go. Seth plugged his free ear with a finger and stared down between his knees as he shouted into his phone to whoever he loved on the other end. The office narrowed as they passed the elevators. Everly Glover punched the call button over and over like she was impatient to get to lunch. She was old enough to be Abel's grandmother. We need to take the stairs, Serenity said as they passed. Come on. It's 73 floors, Everly said after them. At first, Abel thought... Let's put a T on the end of thought. All right. At first, Abel thought the elevator had opened, but then he saw the golden doors fold inward and twist as they fell down the open shaft. The building lilted, and all three of them slid along the tiles toward the openings. Everly fell hard, and fragile bird bones cracked for sure. Her legs slid into the dark space of the shaft. Then her belly went. She clawed out at the foot. She clawed out at the foot Abel had extended as he tried to halt his slide. As her fingers brushed over his shoe and snagged the laces, he pulled his foot away from her reach. Okay, that's good. She pumped her arms trying to find something to hold, but getting nothing. Her wide eyes said to Abel that she was thinking about all those 73 floors. He was sliding again. I need to say that she fell through. Okay. Then she was gone. Then she was gone. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Keep it simple. No, I do not want to turn on autosave. Alright. He was sliding again and expected to drop through the elevator shaft as well. Serenity held on, and the building shifted the other direction. It was dark when they struck the wall. The lights returned as they picked themselves up off the floor and continued onward. I can just say on here. Continued on. Alright. Abel felt another swoon as he looked into the southern-facing offices. Looked into the southern side offices with floors tilting out into space. Through the ruined walls, a path of fiery destruction weaved through the city. Black smoke choked the sky from that path. The monsters, at least the ones along the ground, had either come that way or had left that direction. The roars and explosions told Abel they probably weren't that lucky. "We can't get to them," Serenity said. He had no idea what she was talking about at first. He clued in on the fact that they had stopped moving. As the floor of the office in front of them finally broke away, he saw, Hazel Burke and Harper Sherman, both fine women and good managers, fell out of the building together. Harper already looked unconscious or dead. She was the luckier of the pair if that was true. Hazel was still talking, maybe praying, maybe cursing. She folded... I put ED on the end of this. She folded into a jackknife and disappeared into the city below. Abel and Serenity both moved without saying any more. When they heard metal on metal ahead of them, Abel was sure it was one of the monsters outside. Then he saw Nico French at the end of the next hall, using a piece of pipe to try to pry open the stairwell. It was blocked by a, let's not say piece, let's say slab. By a slab of concrete that extended into the ceiling. Abel looked up when they reached Nico and saw sky past floor 100 above them through the ruptured roof. Pages of documents twirled in and out of view above. Something heavier spun as it fell, but landed on the edge of one of the higher floors. "Help me," he shouted. Abel lost count of how many times he'd heard that today. Excuse me just a second. Alright, Abel lost count of how many times he'd heard that today. "We can't move this." Serenity's palm made an odd, flat sound as she slapped the concrete slab, like Nico didn't know what she meant. "We don't need to move it," Nico said. "We just need the door wide enough to slip through so we can go down." They helped him with the pipe, then caught the leading edge of the door to widen the opening. The concrete did shift and tilted toward them as the stairwell door swung wide. Nico dove through and the pipe clattered as it bounced its way down through the space between levels and railings. Abel tried to back away, but Serenity held on and pulled forward with all her weight. They plunged into the darkness as most of floor 74 came down behind them. The door ripped off its hinges, and then debris sealed the opening. Alright, so far so good. Well, not for them, but for the story. As they ran down the first flight, Abel reached for the rail but found nothing. Serenity pulled him again, saving him from yet another fall. His eyes adjusted to the intermittent red glare of the emergency signs. They took one switchback set of concrete stairs after another. "Where the hell is Nico?" Abel's voice echoed. "No idea. Keep moving." Other voices, mostly cries and moans, traveled from above them and below them. They saw no one else, though, as they moved floor after floor. On the 55th level, fallen stone appeared to block the way. "Can we get over it?" she asked, close to his ear. "I don't know. We need to try. We can't go back up." His foot slipped between two jagged edges of stone, and he definitely cut himself, but nothing was broken as he feared. Let's say the way he had. Nothing was broken the way he had feared when he got his leg free. They dropped down to solid floor on the other side of the barrier and continued down. Alright. Do you think Nico climbed over that before we got here? Abel asked. Lots of little typos here. She gave no answer as she pulled him along with her. The building rumbled and threatened to let's say, throw them around the well. Let's say stairwell. Around the stairwell. They held on to each other and dropped to their knees. More stone collapsed above them. Abel waited for the landing over their heads to crush them. Dust sprinkled their hair and stuck to the patches of blood that was mostly not theirs, but the landing held for now. The stairs in front of them fell away. Let me put a but here. Even though it's a new sentence, new paragraph. But the stairs in front of them fell away, turning the landing they were on into a precipice. The wall beside them fell outward, sparing them from being crushed, but opening a cliff down a sheer drop to the roof of the parking garage still 50 floors down. Their platform remained solid as the noises of collapse gave way to the sheer winds of high altitudes, let's say. Alright, no more screams reached them from above or below. How are they going to get us down from here, she asked. He didn't have an answer. Some organic shape on the wing undulated through the smoky sky. It was unclear and far away. Overlapping roars continued as monsters fought each other and the military response too. All that was quite far away and barely competed with the wind. The building shifted and rumbled. The floor tilted under them, but away from the drop, so that was good. Everything went still for a while as their view shifted from the burning city to a patch of blue sky between columns of smoke. Abel felt his pockets for his cell phone but couldn't find it. He always kept it on him. Would it be good to call anyone anyway? Would the lines be opened, and what would he say? Maybe Seth had been lucky to get through. Maybe that conversation would haunt his loved ones forever. The Damasoto tower, what was left of it, shifted again. A couple rumbles, then a sustained vibration started small and built up in intensity. Without ceasing. Serenity turned to him and hugged him tight with her head over his shoulder. Yes, they could have been something if circumstances had been different. Maybe if they made it down to the lobby in time. He opened his mouth to say something to her, anything, a last thing, but nothing came to him. The terror that had... Okay, hold on. I shifted something at the beginning, so I need to shift it here. The terror that had filled him until he was almost numb to it drifted back down into the Okay. The terror that had, let's say, risen briefly to fill him until he was almost numb to it, drifted back down into that unsettling anxiety he had been feeling before this all started. Something he couldn't remember. Something that surely didn't matter anymore. No, Abel Hale came up with nothing to say in the end. So, alright. No, Abel Hale came up with nothing to say in the end. So they just held each other as vibrations turned the world into a violent blur. The great monsters were several blocks away, closer to the bay, but the cost of their path through Damasoto Tower was not quite finished. As floors 100 through 56 finished cascading one through the next, their perch and lives erased on the way down. The Age of Monsters had returned to this side of the world in grand and awful fashion.